I was standing at my living room window watching the snow come down in sheets when I saw three people in bright orange vests trudging through my backyard toward my propane tank. The blizzard had started 2 hours earlier, and the temperature had already dropped to 8 degrees Fahrenheit in Casper, Wyoming. My wife Amanda was at her sister's place in Denver, having left 3 days ago before the storm warnings got serious, and I was alone in our house on Whispering Pines Drive. The propane tank sat about 30 feet from my back door, a standard 500-gallon unit that kept my house warm and powered my stove. I had just refilled it the week before, spending nearly $2,000 to top it off before winter really hit. Now these people were messing with it, and I could see they had some kind of dolly and straps. I grabbed my coat and boots, not even bothering to zip up properly, and rushed out into the freezing wind. The snow was already 6 inches deep and climbing fast. My feet crunched through the powder as I hurried toward them. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted over the wind. The three people turned around. 2 were men I didn't recognize, both wearing winter gear that looked too nice for manual labor. The third was Patricia Henderson, the president of our Homeowners Association, her bleached blonde hair whipping around under a designer winter hat that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. "Mr. Graham Yates," she said, pulling out a clipboard from inside her jacket. "We're removing this unauthorized propane tank from the premises." "Unauthorized? That's my propane tank. I've had it for 3 years." Patricia shook her head with that condescending smile I had come to despise over the past year. According to Section 8, Subsection 4 of the HOA bylaws, all exterior heating fuel containers must be approved by the Architectural Review Board. You never submitted the proper paperwork. I stared at her in disbelief. "Patricia, it's 8 degrees out here and the forecast says we're getting 2 feet of snow. That tank is the only thing keeping my house warm. My furnace runs on propane. Should have thought of that before violating HOA regulations," she said. "We've been planning this removal for 2 weeks." The board voted unanimously. The 2 men with her started working on the connections again. One had a wrench and was loosening the feed line to my house. "You can't just take my propane tank in the middle of a blizzard. This is theft." Patricia held up a paper, though the wind made it nearly impossible to read. "This is a lien notice. Your property is subject to HOA enforcement. We've documented 17 violations over the past year. This is just the first step in our corrective action plan." My mind was racing. 17 violations. I had gotten maybe 3 notices about my lawn being a half-inch too long and 1 about my mailbox needing paint. Nothing that warranted stealing my heat source during a winter storm. "Where am I supposed to get heat?" "Not my problem," Patricia said. "You have electric baseboards, don't you? Use those. They haven't worked in years. The previous owner disconnected them. The whole house runs on propane. You know this." "Again, not my problem. You should have maintained multiple heating sources." The 2 men had disconnected the line now. One of them, a tall guy with a beard, looked uncomfortable. "Madam, maybe we should wait until after the storm. This seems dangerous." Patricia whirled on him. "I'm paying you $500 each to do a job. Do it, or I'll find someone else and you won't get a dime." The man looked at me apologetically but kept working. They had the tank strapped to the dolly now and were preparing to wheel it away. I noticed they had a small truck parked in my driveway, exhaust puffing white in the frigid air. "This is theft," I said again. "I'm calling the police." Patricia laughed. "Go ahead. The police don't handle civil HOA matters. Besides, good luck getting anyone out here in this weather." I pulled out my phone anyway, my fingers already getting numb from the cold. I had forgotten gloves in my rush outside. I dialed 911, but the call wouldn't go through. I tried again. Nothing. Patricia noticed my struggle. Cell tower must be down from the ice. They were saying on the news it might happen. Guess you're out of luck. The two men were wheeling the tank through my yard now, leaving deep ruts in the snow. My propane tank, filled with $2,000 worth of fuel, was disappearing into the blizzard. "You can't do this," I shouted, but my words were lost in the wind. Patricia came closer, and I could smell the expensive perfume even through the snow and cold. "Mr. Yates, let me make something very clear. I run this HOA and I run this neighborhood. You've been a problem since you moved in. Your property values are dragging down everyone else's. Consider this a warning. Get in line or things will get much worse. What did I ever do to you? You parked your truck on the street overnight last month. You put your trash cans out 6 hours too early. Your grass was brown in July. You painted your front door without approval. Should I go on?" Those are insane complaints. They're violations of our covenant. When you bought this house, you agreed to follow our rules. Now you deal with the consequences. She turned and followed the two men toward the truck. I stood there in the snow, watching helplessly as they loaded my propane tank into the vehicle. The whole process took maybe 10 minutes, and then they were driving away, taillights disappearing into the white void of the blizzard. I stumbled back inside, my feet soaked and freezing. The house was already getting cold. I checked the thermostat. 72 degrees inside, but dropping. Without the propane, the furnace was dead. I tried the cell phone again. Still nothing. The landline was out too, which wasn't surprising given the storm. I went to the basement to check the electrical panel. Sure enough, the electric baseboard heating system had been completely deactivated years ago. The previous owner had told me they switched to propane because it was cheaper and more reliable. They had never mentioned it would make me vulnerable to a vindictive HOA president. The temperature inside dropped to 70 degrees within an hour. I piled on layers of clothing and found every blanket in the house. I tried to heat water on my electric kettle, but the stove was propane too, so that was useless for cooking. At least I had the microwave. As evening came, the storm intensified. The wind howled against the house, and I could hear branches snapping outside. The temperature inside was 62 degrees and falling fast. I knew I was in real danger. Hypothermia was a legitimate threat, especially if the power went out. I tried the phone again every 15 minutes. Nothing. The storm had completely cut me off. By midnight, the inside temperature was 58 degrees. I was huddled on the couch with 4 blankets, wearing 3 layers of clothes, a winter coat, and 2 hats. My breath was visible in the air. I knew I couldn't stay here much longer. If the temperature kept dropping at this rate, I would be in serious trouble by morning. I managed to sleep in fits and starts, shivering despite all the layers. Every time I woke up, I checked the temperature. 56 degrees, 53 degrees, 50 degrees. The storm raged all night. By dawn, which came gray and dim through the heavy snow, the inside of my house was 47 degrees. I could barely feel my fingers and toes. I knew I had to do something or I would die in my own home. I looked outside. The snow had piled up at least 18 inches, maybe more in the drifts. My truck was completely buried. The street hadn't been plowed, but I could see smoke coming from my neighbor's chimney 3 houses down. They had a fireplace. Maybe they would help. I bundled up in every warm thing I owned and stepped outside. The cold hit me like a physical wall. The wind had died down, but the temperature felt like it was below zero. My weather station, which had a battery backup, showed -3 degrees. Walking through the snow was exhausting. Each step took tremendous effort, and I was already weak from the cold and lack of sleep. I made it to my neighbor's house and pounded on the door. Mark Delgado answered, looking surprised. "Graham, what are you doing out in this? The HOA took my propane tank yesterday. Middle of the storm, I have no heat." His face went from surprise to furious. "They did what? Get inside, man. You look half frozen." Mark's house was blessedly warm. He had a gas fireplace and apparently a propane tank that the HOA hadn't known about because it was hidden behind a decorative fence. His wife Rosa brought me hot coffee and wrapped me in a blanket while Mark called his brother, who was a lawyer in Denver. "This is illegal," Mark said after explaining the situation to his brother. "Like, seriously illegal. You can't deprive someone of heat during a blizzard. That's reckless endangerment at minimum." "The phones are down," I said, my teeth still chattering. "I couldn't call anyone." "They knew that," Rosa said. "Patricia knew the phones would be down. She planned this." Mark hung up with his brother. "Antonio says you need to document everything. Take pictures, get statements, and the minute the road's clear, we're filing a police report. This isn't a civil HOA matter. This is theft and endangerment." I stayed at Mark's house for the rest of the day. The storm finally cleared around evening, and the temperature inside my house had dropped to 42 degrees when I checked remotely using my smart thermostat app, which came back online when cell service was restored. The first thing I did was call the police. Casper Police Department sent an officer out the next morning once the roads were passable. Officer Jennifer Park took my statement, photographed my disconnected propane line, and documented everything. She looked disgusted as she wrote up the report. "I've heard about HOA problems, but this is beyond anything I've seen," she said. "I'm forwarding this to detectives. What she did could be considered attempted manslaughter if you had died. Even as it is, theft, reckless endangerment, and possibly criminal mischief. Can I get my propane tank back? We'll do our best. Do you know where they took it?" "No idea." Officer Park made some calls. Within an hour, 2 detectives showed up at my house. Detective Harold Myers and Detective Susan Chen interviewed me extensively, got statements from Mark and Rosa, and started tracking down Patricia Henderson. They found her at home, and from what I heard later, she was utterly unconcerned about the whole situation. She told the detectives that it was an HOA matter and they had no jurisdiction. That was apparently the wrong thing to say. The detectives went to her house with a warrant that afternoon and found my propane tank in her backyard. She had taken it for herself. Her own tank was old and low on fuel, and she had simply decided to steal mine, using the HOA as a cover. Patricia Henderson was arrested that evening on charges of theft, reckless endangerment, and criminal mischief. The bail was set at $50,000. The 2 men she had hired came forward voluntarily and gave statements saying she had told them it was a legitimate HOA action. They had been duped and were cooperative with the investigation. Getting my propane tank back was complicated. It had been disconnected improperly, and I needed a certified technician to reinstall it. But the storm had caused chaos across Wyoming, and every propane company was backed up with emergency calls. I called Armstrong Propane, the company I normally used. The dispatcher, a friendly woman named Carol, sounded sympathetic but overwhelmed. "Mr. Yates, I remember you. You just had a fill-up 2 weeks ago, right? What happened?" I explained the situation. There was a long pause on the other end. "Your HOA president stole your propane tank during the blizzard. That's the most insane thing I've heard all year, and I've heard a lot of crazy calls today. Can you send someone to reinstall it? I can get someone out there tomorrow afternoon. But here's the thing. If Patricia Henderson is involved, I need to warn my boss. She's been a problem customer for years." "What do you mean?" Carol hesitated. "I shouldn't say, but given what she did to you, I think you should know. She's notorious for disputing bills, claiming our drivers damaged her property, and threatening lawsuits. She's cost us thousands in frivolous complaints. We've been looking for a reason to ban her." "Would this count if she stole a customer's tank?" "Oh, absolutely. Let me talk to my manager." The technician came out the next day and reinstalled my tank. He was a grizzled older man named Pete who had been in the propane business for 30 years. He looked at the disconnection point and shook his head. Whoever took this off didn't know what they were doing. Could have caused a gas leak. "You're lucky your house didn't explode." That bad. That bad. This is criminal negligence. I'm documenting this for your insurance and the police investigation." Pete spent 3 hours making sure everything was safe and properly installed. Before he left, he told me that Armstrong Propane was officially banning Patricia Henderson from their service. "Boss made the call this morning. She's blacklisted. We won't deliver to her address, won't service her equipment, nothing." "Can you do that, private company?" "We can refuse service to anyone for any reason, as long as it's not discriminatory. And theft. That's a great reason." Over the next few days, as I recovered from my ordeal and dealt with the police investigation, I learned that Armstrong Propane wasn't the only company taking action. Word spread fast in the propane industry. It's a tight-knit community in Wyoming, where propane is essential for rural living. What Patricia had done was beyond the pale. I got a call from Richard Turner, the owner of Turner Gas Services, the second-largest propane supplier in Wyoming. He had heard about the incident from one of his drivers who knew Pete. "Mr. Yates, I wanted to reach out personally. What happened to you is unacceptable. We're putting Patricia Henderson on our no-service list as well. She's already been a problem customer, and this pushes it over the edge." "I appreciate that, but how many companies are doing this?" "All of us. I talked to the Wyoming Propane Association this morning. We have an informal network where we warn each other about dangerous or problematic customers. Patricia Henderson is now flagged across the entire state. No legitimate propane company will service her address." I was stunned. The entire state. There are 14 major propane suppliers in Wyoming and about 30 smaller ones. Every single one has been notified. She's done. The implications were enormous. Without propane service, Patricia couldn't heat her home, cook, or run her hot water heater. She was essentially being forced to either sell and move or completely renovate her home for a different heating system, which would cost tens of thousands of dollars. The criminal case moved forward quickly. Patricia tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that she had authority under HOA rules to remove the tank. Her lawyer tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing it was a civil matter. The district attorney, Michael Russo, wasn't having it. He filed additional charges of attempted assault in the 3rd degree, arguing that Patricia had knowingly endangered my life by removing my only heat source during a life-threatening blizzard. The prosecutor presented weather records showing the temperature and storm conditions, along with medical testimony about hypothermia risks. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks after the incident. I attended with Mark and Rosa, who had become staunch allies. Amanda had made it back from Denver once the roads cleared, and she was absolutely furious about the whole situation. Patricia showed up to the courthouse looking defiant, dressed in an expensive suit. She clearly thought she was going to walk away from this. Her lawyer, a slick-looking guy named Barry Simmons, presented a motion to dismiss based on HOA authority. Judge Ronald Patterson listened to both sides, then denied the motion to dismiss with barely concealed contempt. "Miss Henderson, I've read the police reports and reviewed the evidence. You removed a homeowner's only heating source during a blizzard. You endangered his life. The fact that you did this under color of HOA authority makes it worse, not better. This case is going forward. I'm also granting the prosecution's request to add charges of abuse of authority." Trial is set for April 15th. Patricia's face went red. She tried to argue with the judge, which was a terrible idea. Judge Patterson threatened her with contempt of court, and she finally shut up. Outside the courthouse, a reporter from the Casper Star-Tribune approached me. The story had gotten local media attention, and apparently it was generating a lot of interest. "Mr. Yates, how does it feel to know that Patricia Henderson has been banned from every propane supplier in the state?" "Honestly, it feels like justice. What she did was cruel and dangerous. I'm glad the propane companies are taking it seriously." "You think the criminal charges will stick?" "I hope so. Nobody should be able to do what she did and get away with it." The story ran the next day with the headline, "HOA President Faces Criminal Charges After Removing Homeowner's Heat During Blizzard." It was picked up by regional news outlets, then national news. Suddenly, I was getting calls from producers at various news shows wanting interviews. I did a few, trying to stay measured and factual. But the public reaction was overwhelmingly on my side. Social media exploded with anti-HOA sentiment, with thousands of people sharing their own horror stories about abusive homeowners associations. The statewide ban from propane suppliers became a major talking point. People were fascinated by the idea that an entire industry had collectively decided to refuse service to someone. Some argued it was unfair, but most seemed to think it was appropriate given what Patricia had done. Patricia, meanwhile, was discovering just how difficult life was without propane service. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had tried to get service from every company she could find. All of them turned her down. She tried to use different names, but her address was flagged in the system. She even tried to hire someone to buy propane in portable tanks, but that was expensive and impractical for heating a whole house. She eventually had to hire an electrician to install electric heating, which cost her nearly $40,000. Her electric bills skyrocketed, and her house was never quite warm enough during cold snaps. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The HOA itself was also in turmoil. Several board members resigned once they learned what Patricia had done. It turned out that she had lied to them about having proper authority to remove my tank. They had approved a violation enforcement action, but hadn't been told it involved taking someone's heat source during a blizzard. 3 families in the neighborhood filed paperwork to dissolve the HOA entirely. Wyoming law required 75% of homeowners to vote in favor of dissolution, but after the publicity around Patricia's arrest, it looked like that might actually happen. I attended a special HOA meeting in February held at the community center. The room was packed with angry homeowners, many of whom I had never seen at a meeting before. Patricia was notably absent, on advice of her lawyer. The vice president, a mild-mannered accountant named Robert Chen, tried to call the meeting to order. The crowd wasn't interested in order. One after another, homeowners stood up to complain about petty violations, overreaching enforcement, and Patricia's reign of terror. She fined me $500 because my son's basketball hoop was 6 inches over the property line. One man shouted. She tried to make me cut down a tree that was blocking her view. A woman yelled. She measured my grass with a ruler and said it was too long by a 1/4 inch. The complaints went on for 2 hours. Robert finally held up his hands for silence. "Look, I hear you all. I'm horrified by what Patricia did. The board is voting tonight to remove her as president and ban her from holding any HOA position. We're also voting to rescind all pending violation actions and reduce enforcement to only essential items. And yes, we're putting dissolution to a vote. The room erupted in applause. The vote to remove Patricia was unanimous among the remaining board members. The dissolution measure would go to a full homeowner vote in March. Meanwhile, my civil lawsuit against Patricia and the HOA was moving forward. My lawyer, Thomas Wright, filed for damages including the cost of reinstalling my propane tank, compensation for the danger I was put in, emotional distress, and punitive damages. The HOA's insurance company settled quickly, offering me $75,000 to drop the claim against the HOA itself. They wanted to separate the organization from Patricia's individual actions. I accepted because I knew the real target was Patricia personally. Her homeowner's insurance refused to cover her actions, claiming it was an intentional criminal act. That meant she was personally liable for any judgment against her. Thomas filed for $300,000 in damages. Patricia's lawyer tried to negotiate, but I wasn't interested. She had nearly killed me and showed no remorse. Thomas was pushing for a jury trial, confident that we would win big. The criminal trial came first, starting on April 15th as scheduled. The prosecution called me as the first witness. I testified about the events of that day, about watching my propane tank being stolen while the blizzard raged, about the temperature dropping in my house, about fearing for my life. The prosecutor, Assistant DA Jennifer Walsh, walked me through everything methodically. She showed pictures of the disconnected propane line, weather records showing the temperature and storm conditions, and medical records from my doctor visit after the incident showing early signs of hypothermia and frostbite on my fingers. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue on cross-examination that I could have gone to a neighbor's house sooner, that I wasn't really in danger, that I was exaggerating. But I had documented everything, and my testimony was backed up by hard evidence. The prosecution called Pete, the propane technician, who testified about the dangerous way my tank had been disconnected. They called Officer Park, who testified about Patricia's dismissive attitude when confronted by police. They called Mark and Rosa, who testified about my condition when I showed up at their door. The most damning testimony came from one of the men Patricia had hired to move the tank. He had accepted a plea deal in exchange for his testimony. He said Patricia had specifically chosen to do it during the blizzard because she knew the phones would be down and I couldn't call for help. She said it would teach him a lesson, he testified. She said he needed to know who was in charge. The defense tried to argue that Patricia had believed she had authority under HOA rules, that it was a mistake rather than malicious. But the evidence of planning and timing contradicted that. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Theft, reckless endangerment, criminal mischief, and abuse of authority. Patricia's face went white as the verdict was read. Her lawyer immediately filed notice of appeal, but Judge Patterson set sentencing for 2 weeks later. At the sentencing hearing, the prosecutor asked for jail time. Your Honor, the defendant knowingly endangered Mr. Yates's life for petty, vindictive reasons. She showed no remorse, tried to use her position of authority to justify criminal behavior, and has continued to deny any wrongdoing. The state requests 1 year in county jail, 5 years probation, and full restitution. Patricia's lawyer argued for leniency, claiming she had no prior criminal record and had already suffered enough through the publicity, and being banned from propane service. Judge Patterson wasn't sympathetic. Miss Henderson, you abused your authority as HOA president to commit a serious crime. You put Mr. Yates's life in danger for no reason other than your own ego and desire for control. The fact that you still don't seem to understand the gravity of what you did concerns me greatly. He sentenced her to 8 months in county jail, 3 years probation, 1,000 hours of community service, and full restitution for all my costs including the propane, reinstallation, and associated expenses. The total came to about $12,000. Patricia was led away in handcuffs, still protesting that it was all unfair. I felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that justice had been served, but sadness that it had come to this at all. The civil trial was scheduled for June, but Patricia's lawyer approached Thomas with a settlement offer in early May. Patricia was facing bankruptcy from legal fees and the criminal restitution. She offered to settle the civil case for $150,000, which was about half of what we were asking for, but represented essentially everything she had. Thomas advised me to take it. We could win more at trial, but collecting would be difficult if she declares bankruptcy. This way you get paid, and she faces real financial consequences. I accepted the settlement. Patricia had to sell her house to pay it, along with her legal fees and criminal restitution. She moved out of the neighborhood in July, and I heard she left Wyoming entirely, moving to Arizona to live with a relative. The HOA dissolution vote happened in late May. 83% of homeowners voted in favor. Whispering Pines Drive was no longer governed by a homeowners association. The covenants were dissolved, the Architectural Review Board was eliminated, and everyone was free to manage their own properties as they saw fit, within city regulations. There was a neighborhood celebration in June, a block party where everyone brought food and drinks. The mood was jubilant. People were talking about painting their doors fun colors, putting up basketball hoops, planting whatever they wanted in their yards. Mark raised a toast to Graham for standing up to tyranny and to the end of the HOA. Everyone cheered. Amanda hugged me tight. I'm so glad you're okay. When I think about what could have happened that night, I know, but it's over now. We're free. The propane ban stayed in effect, becoming something of a legend in the Wyoming propane industry. I heard that at training sessions for new drivers. Patricia's case was used as an example of why you don't mess with people's heating fuel. The story had gone viral enough that propane companies in other states started implementing similar flagging systems for dangerous customers. I got a call in August from Richard Turner, the propane company owner who had been one of the first to ban Patricia. Mr. Yates, I wanted to update you. The Wyoming Propane Association has created a formal industry blacklist for safety and theft concerns. Patricia Henderson is the first official entry. We've also developed new protocols for investigating suspicious service calls or removal requests. Your case has literally changed how we do business. I'm glad something good came out of it. More than you know. We've caught 2 other cases this year where people tried to steal or tamper with tanks that weren't theirs. Because everyone is more alert now, we stopped them before anyone got hurt. Life slowly returned to normal. My propane tank sat in my backyard, properly installed and maintained. I never worried about the HOA anymore because there wasn't one. I could park my truck on the street, put my trash cans out whenever I wanted, and paint my door any color I chose. I did paint it, actually. Bright blue, just because I could. Amanda and I had people over more often, feeling more relaxed in our own home. Mark and Rosa became close friends. The neighborhood felt different without the constant threat of violation notices and fines. People were friendlier, more willing to help each other out. In September, I got a letter from the Casper Star-Tribune. They were doing a follow-up story on the case and wanted to interview me. I agreed, and the resulting article focused on how the incident had led to positive changes in both the neighborhood and the propane industry. The reporter asked me if I had any regrets about how things played out. No regrets, I said. I wish it hadn't happened at all, of course, but once it did, I'm glad I fought back. Nobody should have that kind of power over other people, and nobody should be able to endanger someone's life over petty rules and personal grudges. What would you say to other people dealing with abusive HOAs? Document everything. Know your rights. Don't be afraid to fight back. And remember that sometimes the authorities can help, even when it seems like a civil matter. What Patricia did crossed the line into criminal behavior, and the police treated it appropriately. The article ran with a photo of me standing in front of my house, my bright blue door visible in the background. The headline read, "1 year later, how a stolen propane tank led to industry-wide changes and the end of a tyrannical HOA." I framed that article and hung it in my garage, right above where I kept my tools. It was a reminder that standing up for yourself matters, that justice is possible, and that sometimes the little guy wins. Patricia Henderson served her 8 months and disappeared from public view. I heard rumors she tried to get involved in her new HOA in Arizona, but was rejected when they did a background check and found her criminal record. Apparently, criminal HOA tyranny was a disqualifying factor for board membership in that particular community. The 2 men who had helped her move my tank both avoided jail time due to their cooperation. They had genuinely believed they were doing legitimate work and had come forward voluntarily once they realized they had been part of a crime. The prosecutor agreed they were victims of Patricia's manipulation rather than willing co-conspirators. My propane bills continued to arrive on schedule, and Armstrong Propane remained my provider. Carol, the dispatcher, always greeted me warmly when I called for deliveries. "Mr. Yates. Good to hear from you. How's that tank doing?" "Perfect. No one's tried to steal it lately." She laughed. "We keep an eye on your address. If anyone calls about your tank who isn't you or your wife, we're flagging it immediately." The attention to customer safety that came out of my case was something I was genuinely proud of. No one else would have to go through what I did, at least not without the propane companies being much more cautious about the limits of HOA authority and when civil matters become criminal. I agreed. And in March, I found myself standing in front of a room full of lawyers, judges, and legal scholars at the Wyoming State Bar Conference in Cheyenne. I told my story, answered questions, and emphasized that what had saved me was the willingness of law enforcement and the judicial system to recognize that what Patricia had done was a crime, not just an HOA dispute. Judge Patterson was there, and during the Q&A session, he added his perspective. This case was a clear example of how authority can be abused and why we must be vigilant about protecting individual rights, even within private governance structures like HOAs. Miss Henderson believed her position made her above the law. The criminal justice system proved otherwise. The audience applauded, and afterwards several attorneys came up to thank me for speaking. One mentioned that he was working on legislation to reform HOA powers in Wyoming, inspired partly by my case. I wished him luck. Driving back to Casper, I reflected on how far things had come. What had started as a terrifying night during a blizzard had led to meaningful change. An abusive HOA president was gone. A tyrannical organization had been dissolved. An entire industry had improved its safety protocols, and legal reforms were being considered. All because I had refused to accept that someone could steal my heat during a winter storm and get away with it. When I got home, Amanda had made dinner. We ate together, talking about ordinary things. Work, family, plans for the weekend. Normal, peaceful life. The kind of life I had almost lost because of one person's cruelty and ego. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I looked out the window at my propane tank. It was just visible in the moonlight, sitting exactly where it belonged. My property on my land, providing heat for my home. Protected not just by law, but by an entire industry that had decided that what happened to me would never happen to anyone else if they could prevent it. I thought about Patricia, wherever she was now. I didn't hate her, not anymore. She had paid a heavy price for her actions, lost everything, and would carry a criminal record for the rest of her life. I hoped she had learned something, that she understood why what she did was so wrong. But mostly, I just felt grateful. Grateful for the police who took my complaint seriously, for the prosecutors who pursued justice, for the judge who saw through the HOA authority excuse, for the propane companies who stood up for their customers, for the neighbors who supported me, and for a legal system that, despite its flaws, had worked. I climbed into bed next to Amanda, who was already half asleep. She mumbled something and rolled closer to me. I put my arm around her and closed my eyes, warm and safe in my own home, exactly as it should be. The story of the stolen propane tank during the blizzard became part of neighborhood lore, told to new residents as a warning about the old days when the HOA had power. It became a teaching tool for the propane industry, a case study for lawyers, and a cautionary tale for anyone who thought their position gave them unlimited authority over others. But for me, it was simpler than all that. It was a reminder that even when you're alone in a freezing house during a blizzard, even when the phones are down and help seems impossible, you can still fight back. You can still win. Justice is possible, and sometimes, just sometimes, the bad guys really do lose and the good guys really do win. Not because of luck or chance, but because people refused to accept injustice and were willing to stand up for what was right. My propane tank sat outside, keeping my house warm, a silent sentinel against the cold Wyoming winter. It would be there tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. No one would take it again. Not Patricia Henderson, not any future HOA, not anyone. It was mine, and I was free.